All right, guys, I'm Nicolette, and today Brian and I are here with Joanne Pransky. She is the world's first robotic psychiatrist, and she's going to talk to us a little bit about what that means. So, hello, Joanne. How are you? Thank you for joining us today.
Thank you for having me.
So, Joanne, can you tell us, just to get us started, tell us a little bit about yourself and kind of that journey that led you to becoming a robotic psychiatrist?
Well, it's a really long journey that I hopefully won't bore you with, but it started literally over 40 years ago when I was in college. And I don't know, I was studying human and child development, but I just became obsessed with the fact that we wouldn't be able to keep up with the exponential rate of technology from a social, psychological, and emotional perspective. And that came really clear to me when I was in the mid 80s. I was selling PC systems. This is first time systems to small businesses, doctors, lawyers. And I could see there was no way that, the lawyer who expected his secretary for the first time to have everything, done tomorrow was going to take 6 months just to manually input it. There was no way that we were ready, say, for future with robots in our home, never mind, programming VCR. So I decided to use a little bit of humor, and I said, that's it. I'm going to be the world's first robotic psychiatrist. And I was humorously trying to prepare the world by saying, one day, like pets or like children, you'll take them to a shrink when they get jealous, and you'll put matching clothes on them and go bowling, And, so that became my mission in 1986. And I also at the same time brought alive an Isaac Asimov character called Dr. Susan Calvin. And he created her in 1950, and she was a robo-psychologist. So I updated it for the 80s, hoping I'd make a little bit more money by dubbing myself as a shrink versus a psychologist, which was not the case. And actually in 1989, Isaac Asimov himself dubbed me the real life Susan Calvin.
Oh,
That's actually really,
that is so cool.
Yeah, it is. It's in my still. It's kind of like my claim to fame. It's been a very long journey. I like to joke. I've known a lot of famous dead men. I got to speak with Timothy Leary, at a world science fiction convention. And no, that was really so. I met him, and he dubbed me that, and we corresponded until his death in '92.
Wow, you can't really get higher level interaction than that,
Yeah, right. So people say, so where were you studying, robotic psychiatry? And I'm like, dude, I pioneered the field, even though it's very different now, right? Where you can actually go and study right. Components of it. But yeah. Well, thank you for saying that, because it's been a long challenge. But yeah, that's what I have to remember at the end of the day, that I'm the real life Susan Calvin.
Yeah, that's a pretty high honor. So
well, thank you. Well, some people don't even know, actually. I mean, current engineers and don't even know who Isaac Asimov is. I mean, there you go for hopefully carrying forward the written word. I mean, people know if you say the movie I, Robot, but they don't necessarily. Right. Engineers, is science fiction. They don't necessarily know who Isaac Asimov is.
What's crazy about that is, I always find like science fiction actually we've had talks with other people about this, about how science fiction actually sort of dictates the future of technology sometimes, right? You see science, right. One of my favorite writers, Jules Verne, Jules Verne was like predicting the future, way before even people were thinking about this. So, it's interesting that, engineers may not know who that is, because it's so much of what has happened over the last couple of decades,
Oh no, but I just meant like him specifically, because
no, I know,
a long time. But that's true, and I mean a ton of famous roboticists have been extremely inspired by science fiction. Actually, Dr. Robin Murphy, and she is probably the pioneer of, well known for disaster robots. Whether it's now for coronavirus or going into 9/11 or going into Fukushima, and she has a podcast, on science fiction and robots, and has written some books. So, she and a lot of successful and famous roboticists were inspired, whether it's R2D2, but yeah, so science fiction eventually, Asimov was clearly an amazing futurist.
Right.
And he totally predicted. And he didn't even know what a robot was, really. So, yeah, he didn't even use a computer. I think he wrote, one of the world's most prolific authors. And I think he just used like a word processor in the 80s, So.
Yeah,
I still use pen and paper, so I don't know.
Oh, well, there you go. Whatever worked. Yeah.
But, Joanne, can you tell us a little bit about what a robot psychiatrist does?
Yeah, sure.
What do you
So
do?
she patiently waits for patients, actually. So keep in mind when I did this in 1986, right? Robotics was really in its infancy, and especially like 95 or 99% industrial robots. So there were no service robots. There were, none of the technologies, AI that were available today. So when I decided to be this, it was so far from what people knew. They go, "Oh, what do you think of the new Jane Fonda videotapes?" And I'd say, "No, not aerobics, robotics." So I kind of made my mission for my lifetime, pre-singularity, of course, that I was going to create awareness, because the world literally did not know about robotics, and to create awareness would hopefully lead to acceptance. And I wanted to create awareness by bringing robots onto national television and film. Like, that was my mission, and that was my business model. Was like Joan Embry or Jack Hanna, who would bring animals, right, rare animals, onto late night television or morning television, and the world would be seeing animals they'd never get to see otherwise. So that's what I wanted to do with robots. Of course, so I pitched stupid robot tricks to Letterman in '87. I went to New York. Actually, I was looking for these non-industrial robot applications, which were very few. But, some women spend all their money on whatever shoes. I was spending them on looking for robots to bring on television. So I went to New York, and right there is still Honeybee Robotics, and they had this huge, the first robo bartender, but it was like the size of a building. So something that was not going to easily come on to a stage on late night. And then I went to, I remember seeing this awesome robot by Pharmatic, a company in agricultural robot in Canada, and it was helping the sow industry, because when sows, they give such big litters that a lot of them die. The little piglets die because they can't get to the mothers, to milk. So they developed this robot, where all these electronic teats would come out, and it would sound an oinking sound, and the lot would come up, and it was hilarious, and it was a really good application. It was increasing the pig population by 30%. But so I went up there, and they were in a prototype stage. So they didn't want, this was in the 80s again, they didn't want a product on TV that wasn't, So it's been far and few between. I've had some successes. I brought a Chinese twin android onto Kimmel. I consulted for Eagle Eye Film and Ender's Game, and I brought real users of prosthetics, exoskeleton robotics from around the world. So not just actors, we had real users on the set, and we used real surgical robots that the world had never seen before, just coming from prototype into commercial from Germany. So those were some of the things I did. In the meantime, I was also an official judge on Comedy Central Presents BattleBots, Comedy Central Sports, and that was from 2000 to 2002, and that was really fun. And I give BattleBots credit for really making robots water cooler talk, right? That was, that really brought it. So that was an example. And other than that, I completely engrossed myself in the robotics industry, from the real world robotics to science fiction robotics. I sold industrial robots for 10 years, and that was a tremendous learning experience to gain, an education on real world robotics. That's like my school of hard knocks education right there.
Was that, did you do that intentionally, to learn more about?
I did do that intentionally. So I always said, there are things, I always had these Dr. Joanne projects, right? I would take an Omnibot 2000 personal toy robot when I lived in Florida, and I had literally pictures done. It's right on my website, and of like the robot like golfing, and the robot driving through in McDonald's. this is like, you know, again, like maybe 1991, and on a double date, you know, with an elderly couple at Morrison's cafeteria. So I've always envisioned, you know, anthropomorphizing in with robots. So I always had these projects, but I had to find a way to make income, right? How does robotic psychiatrists make a living, then create their own clients? So I decided, you know, at some point, even if I was cleaning bathrooms in a robot company, that's what I needed to do. So I started in technical writing for a company in Boca Raton, Florida, and it was an American subsidiary of a Japanese company. And then I was in marketing, and then I was sales, and that was a really amazing journey for me. And at the same time, I also had the opportunity to become an associate editor of some academic journals, Industrial Robot Journal, Sensory Review Journal. So, you know, since then I've consulted and I write, and I consulted for robot companies in PR, and at the same time try to, you know, find real robotic projects to work on. I mean, one of those that I worked on, and again, it's not always about the money, you know, it's always about, for me, doing world's first robotic effort. So I spent a lot of my money, which did not give payback, but I created a YouTube channel like in 2016, and I wanted to do these world first robotic applications, right? So places, real business uses of a robot before it ever is a real use. And so the first one I did, and we did this crew, I wanted to, and it's very prominent because telepresence robotics today, obviously post COVID-19, as we speak, are being used, right? But again, imagine, even though it's 4 years ago, that was, you know, 4 or 5 years ago, that was a long time ago in terms of technology. So I envision that we would be using this, what I call like remote religious memberships, right? So if you're traveling and you can't get back to your Sunday choir, you could go through your robot. So I brought a grandparents in the Negev of Israel to be able to attend their grandson's bar mitzvah here in Northern California, and do what's called the Aliyah on the Bima. In other words, they really got to physically, through a robot, be there on the stage. And I called it, you know, the first robot in the world to be able to give an Aliyah. But I had, you know, you guys are more knowledgeable about production. I had no idea. So this took 6 months. I had to find, first of all, I wanted a real world case. I did not want to make it up. So I really had to find people throughout the world I could connect. So I had to find, you know, a temple that would allow technology and a camera in and have Wi-Fi, and then in the Negev they didn't, and I had to hire, you know, consultants to go to their house, and they never used it. It was unbelievable. So I did a bunch of these, which, you know, like I said, maybe 5 people watched. So I spent a lot of money, but I had to
I watched them.
You did, you poor thing. You know, I mean, I had to do it because it was in my head, you know, I couldn't get it out of my head. All these potential business uses I wanted to do, you know, so that's what I did. But so there was a way I had to make income, but I never stopped doing these projects. One other project I did was Dr. Barry, a professor of ethics down at Notre Dame de Mure University here in Northern California, and Bina 48 was this first really mind clone robot AI to complete a college course in the world, and that was through his class. And I pitched this to Hollywood as a documentary, and it got picked up, and it's coming out hopefully by the end of this year. But that, you know, that was like just something that was very gratifying for me, because again, the world is going to see and learn via, you know, a film, but, you know, not necessarily that I got paid to do it.
So I have a question. Why?
Yes. Man in the red.
Right. So people are obsessed to me with like 2 things that are even like monkeys, or, you know, apes, or right. And robots. Why are we so obsessed with things that are sort of like us, you know, in many ways? Like, we seem to get very obsessed with those 2 things, especially on the internet. You know, people like love monkey videos and they love robot videos. What is it like in the human that sort of brings that out?
Well, you know, it differs. I mean, for the public, and again, that's my market, the public. You know, I used to joke, I mean, decades ago, when I'd give talks to engineers, and I'd say, oh, on your way out, don't forget to get the National Enquirer. You know, and they're like, what do you know, this is like, an academic IEEE conference, and they thought I was nuts. And I'm like, well, even if you're making industrial robots at some point, the public, right, the masses, even if you're selling a robot to another engineer, well, the person making that decision could be the public, has no idea about robotics, right? The person signing off on purchasing. So back to your question. So if you're an engineer, you might be just completely enamored as to how to make us better humans. How do we improve ourselves? How can we become more robotic, or how can we utilize robotics to improve our lives? But the public, I think, is fascinated because they've seen it so much in the media and science fiction throughout their lives, right? And B, because it's exactly that. I think it reminds them of ourselves in some way, but in a different way, it doesn't. And that can either be interpreted as, and that's a little freaky, or it can be something to aspire to, hopefully, but that's not necessarily the case. So I think that people fear what they don't know. And at the same time, that's kind of my role, to bridge that gap and to make people, to make them not know, to make them know, and to make people understand not only the benefits, but the challenges. I mean, to really, depict them properly and with proper expectations.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think I must have watched the first Boston Dynamics Big Dog video like
Yeah.
times, like you get.
Yeah, well, first of all, that, I know Mark Raybird. I've known him for decades, and I mean, that is just an amazing application. And what you don't know, if you're just watching that video, is it took him. I mean, I've been doing what I've been doing, but obviously, he's been doing that since the 70s, maybe early 80s. So what the public doesn't know, right, is how long it takes to do something like that, and B, what are its uses and what are its costs. I mean, the military, up until he sold his company, was really the primary investor of that. But one example I give of proper expectations. So sometimes you see an example of when they're pushing the dog.
Yeah.
And you get all these, people like, oh my God, there's the robot, like hashtag robots me too. But what I know from working in robotics is that, this is how you test a robot. It's not that they're abusing a robot. It's not that they're misusing a robot. They need to test it, right? If you don't, it's just like a battle bot. If you don't flip it over before you get to the arena and test and beat the crap out of it, how are you going to know if it's going to withstand what its purpose is?
No, I agree.
So same with Boston Dynamics. It's if you're going to let it out in the real world, in the real environment, particularly outdoors, and a boulder's coming. So, but those are things that the public didn't know. So that's where I kind of see myself as this role to because the public, oh, the poor robot, no, that robot cannot be my patient because there's really nothing wrong with that robot.
What happens then, right? So you're kicking the robot over. What happens now, and there's a lot of cool stuff with the sensors and the servos that happen in Big Dog, right? That make it stay up. But what happens then when you put a little bit of AI where it knows someone kicked it? Do you know what I mean?
Well, that's very interesting you say that. It may not know that someone kicked it, so maybe it's receiving pressure or some scientific measurement to respond of survival versus like it's only us that connotate a negative thing, but at the same time, I joke that that's exactly what I see as a robotic psychiatrist. Patients that come to me that forced to marry, forced to have sex, were physically abused. So as a result of all that, I kind of coined a couple of decades ago. I mean, there's ROS, the Robot Operating System, which is an open source system. Mm-hmm. But I've been promulgating HOS, the Human Operating System, because as I mentioned decades ago, it's really the humans that I'm mostly concerned about, right? So if you get a robot in your home or my home or Nicolette's home, and that's great, right? We hope that we have the right morals and values and be part of the family. I mean, normal fighting and stuff, but imagine if you got your robot into the home of O.J. Simpson, where the robot maid says, I'm not putting cutlery down there. Are you kidding me? He's going to use it against me. It's really the humans that robots will learn from.
Right. Yeah. I mean, it's interesting you pointed out that it's almost like survival, because I never really thought about it this way. Like, I have a good friend who was studying for her PhD, was studying like drugs and like insects, and it was, but the idea was like, and I was like, well, how does it really work? It's no, it's like instinct, right? Like, if I see light left, go right, like that's the bug's thought process. So is it going to be some of that, like the robots are going to have the survival instinct, like this may actually damage me, like whatever it is, whether it's an environmental factor or a person or.
Yeah, I mean, but there are lots of revised, and obviously Asimov's laws were the first. Some people abide by them, but they just don't work. And there are lots of different updated laws that have been created by various scientists. But, it depends on the function of the robot, right? Is the function of the robot to, hopefully is to prevent harm from coming to a human, but then you get into all those trolley tests and, cars. I mean, if you're gonna have to stop on the brake, I mean, we have to make these decisions all day long as humans. So hopefully though, part of it will be, if you're not protecting humanity, which is a 0th law, right? Or if you're not protecting another human, and if, you may have to cause injury to a human, right? One versus, taking out 100 in a bus. Hopefully there will be something. I mean, that's what I say is that, the laws should it's people that we need to be careful of, right? So, right, should someone be arrested for abusing their robot or disrespecting their robot or misusing their robot, right? So someone can misuse their robot indirectly to go into my neighbor's house and steal jewelry. I mean, people do this all the time online. I mean, what's the difference except now, if you think of a robot as a physical interaction with the environment, not just a software, not a bot. That's another thing. The media misuses it. There aren't robots that, robots aren't hacking my computer. Those are bots. Those are that's just software. But if a robot were to hack my computer, it would be like common, game on it.
I so your Roomba sitting there with a hammer.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So and I do. I think there'll be a lot of laws around misuse and abuse. And I mean, look, we don't even unfortunately have laws for who people should be as parents. There aren't even laws requiring us as parents to have some form of a class. I mean, that's unbelievable. How am I here trying to get people to be educated about robots when we can't even respect another human being, Right. So now we're going to bring another entity into the mix, and that to me is going to be very, I have I don't want to call it a dark side, but I've had some very, very, very serious concerns, and instead of freaking out about them 40 years ago, 30 years ago, even now, I've tried to use a positive way of trying to prepare people, but
hey, I mean, maybe the robots will, of all those like crappy parents, will kick the parents' ass.
Well, then there's robots for use, and then there's the near future and the upcoming future where it's not just them versus us. There'll be standalone robots. I can't wait, to be able to go, like where are they right now to do, I could actually really, would be great if I could physically remotely have them shop for me at the grocery store and grab the stuff and then just bring it home. And I could see what they're seeing, and I'm like, no, yeah, what does the ingredients say on that, sweet corn, So it would be great, right? And you don't even have to have them so autonomous by themselves. They could be remotely operated right from here. But I also see a near future where we're improving ourselves physically, cognitively, right, to live longer. So in a quality of life, like I joke that like I'll be the first person to volunteer, to upload, upload a brain, because as I'm getting older, that function is diminishing, obviously. So, people, and you can see post, this where we are right now, not post coronavirus, but post this. I always think things pre this, and this is like a big mark in the whole world, of time, because all of a sudden people now have a very different view of robots. We in the industry have been saying 20 years ago, why have humans put their hands on hamburgers? Why have humans put their hands pharmaceutical pills where they can, where they can screw up and poison Tylenol. So we've been saying that for years. It's not meant for humans, but everyone would be saying, well, what about the cook? What's his job going to be? And what's the waitress's job going to be? And they didn't look at it like we do in the industry, like to improve productivity. Now people can't get enough of that, right? Where's a robot to disinfect? Where's a robot to do this and that? But what comes out of all these technologies is hopefully emerging to, like, particularly medically, right? So no one argues about a robot if it means that we can have a cure for cognitive diseases like Parkinson's or Alzheimer's, right? If I could get an implant, a chip in my brain that would prevent that, okay, no one's going to say, oh, because robotics really encompasses many, many, many different sciences and disciplines. So when I use robots, I think the world is thinking of what they've experienced in a robot. So an engineer might be thinking of an industrial robotic arm. The public may not have any experience with a robot, and they might be thinking of science fiction. But as we merge together, that's to make ourselves better, more superhuman, right? Whether we have a disability, we have a prosthetic, or whether we just have things to nanobots that can go in, and hopefully chemotherapy will one day be passe as little nanobots go in and clean our arteries and diffuse tumors and that sort of thing.
So that kind of ties in, to marketing the robots. And I know this is something that was on the top of your mind, but is it really then that as we're marketing the robots, we should be portraying them in a different way? Is there a certain technique that should be used when marketing robots?
Well, there's so many different robots. So the answer to that is so many different companies brand it very, very differently, understandably, right? Industrial robot is a whole system. And versus, say, a consumer robot like the Roomba, or upcoming robots right now that are being sold as they're socially assistive robots. So they're all different. The only commonality, I believe, is that you have to kind of make proper expectations, but keep the dream alive of what it could be, because technology is always changing. It's never stagnant, right? It's not like, okay, here you go, that's it. So today it might be just a Roomba, but in the future it might be something small that can end up cleaning my toilet or my shower. So when we do promotional videos and marketing, I think it's very important to market again in a proper way and not give too much excitement, because then you have disappointment, right? And I mean, that happened with Jibo. They had like probably the best commercial I've ever seen, but it wasn't going to be what people were going to buy at the time. Not that Jibo couldn't have been that independent and autonomous and intelligent or whatever else you want to call it, but it was so great that that's what people expected. So I think there has to be a really fine line between keeping people's interest and also touting the benefits. I mean, the benefits may not always be a cost justification in the factory. The benefit could be, companionship, right? Like, especially with all the lonely, people isolated today. So anyway, that's how I see it. I don't think there's one easy answer, because robotics and robots are so different. There are robots that are doing, just about everything in the world, from, surgical to recycling of trash and all of these justifications and all of these awareness, but we have to keep in mind who is using it and who is going to be collaborating with that robot. And I think that's another thing about robots, is it's not just, very few robots are not working with humans. I mean, just about somewhere there's a human in the loop, right? Whether you see them or not, there's a few. So I think we have to kind of get over, in particularly in America, this fear of, robots replacing. It's just like the computer, right? The computer, if I were to tell you 50 years ago when that movie came out, with HAL, 2001 Space Odyssey, right? People were totally fearful of computers taking their jobs, they were going to kill them, and here we are 50 years later, and we are dependent on computers. And I think that's the same way we're going to be with robotic technology. That one day we're going to look back and go, I can't believe you guys are so slow in the world to accept that. You know, look what you were missing.
Do you think with the, with marketing of robots, right, you sort of hit on like there's different, applications, right? You have industrial robots. It's sort of like no one's going to really care what that looks like. It's about function, right? If it's a giant arm or whatever
Yeah.
achieving the function. But would consumer, do you think consumer robots are going to be more, I don't, more human like, right? You see a lot of the robotics research and a lot of the ones that they have that are testing, with people for companionship and things like that,
Right.
human looking, right? Or more Android-esque. Versus when it's industrial or medical, it doesn't really matter because it's more about the function. Whereas
Right.
if it's, consumer based, is it going to be more, Android-esque? I mean, that's the only word I can think of here, but.
Yeah, no, that's a really good question. And there are a lot that aren't. I mean, in other words, there are a lot, like, for example, for autistic children, you don't need to have a human, you can have a caricature or a cartoon, or, I don't know if you're familiar with LEQ by Intuition Robotics. And it's almost like this, almost like this beautifully designed, like a light. It's more like this light that bends and responds, but it's not a human face. And you have Catalia Health's Mabu, which is for sort of like a character that way. And now you're going to have a lot of other robots, robotic pets even that have AI and even as a medical device. So yes, function's important and design is very important. But personally, what I think is going to happen is that I personally think that, yes, we want to eventually look into the eyes of something that looks like us. So if I'm a student and I'm talking to a robotic teacher, I mean, yeah, it could look like, what is that, Hero 6, is it?
Hero 6, yeah, Hero 6.
Right? I mean, it can look like anything. And if I'm a kid, that would even be more creative. But eventually, I think that that's who we humans, what we know best, right? We're used to looking in someone's eyes and looking at their face and looking at a response. And there's that. And then there's also that we are creating digital versions of ourselves as we go forward, right? I mean, how am I supposed to know that you two are really you two? How are you supposed to know that this is a digital version of me? Okay, because this is really what's going to happen in a few years. So how are we supposed to know if that's really a digital version? But at the same time, imagine if you could have something like this of someone who has passed away. So you had the digital version, and this is what a mind clone is. And you have created by Dr. Martine Rothblatt, coined by her. So, and that was what Bina 48 is. Imagine if we had examples of you, digital versions of you that had basically your personality and your beliefs and your values, right? So if something happened to you, your children would have this. And I think that's what, deep down, what we humans aspire, that's why we're fearful of death, right? Because we don't want to leave. We don't want it to end. So if we can just say goodbye to our biological beings and have our non-biological. So even though this today may seem science fiction, that's why I think that, that's why I want a patient with a human face. It doesn't have to be to have the best utility or the best use today, but I just think that that's inevitable. I think that we want ourselves. We want to, and you see that. I mean, years ago we started with little, emoticons, right? Or we sign off some character in our email or in a text that we've created to look like us. Well, imagine if that us took on, a 3D personality with all your attributes. So that's how I think that's, so if I'm and imagine that, if I'm alone in Asia, for example, and I have no way of meeting someone, it doesn't have to be Asia, it could be Italy, it could be here, but, I want that companion to be probably what I want most in a companion, regardless of whether I want it to be a sexual companion or an intellectual companion or my cooking companion, but it's most likely that you're conjuring up some human, right? And a teacher could be the best 13 teachers you ever had. And you might want to see them each time, you know, for something different.
Yeah.
That's what the robotic psychiatrist thinks, anyway.
Yeah, because I mean, I know the reason why I asked that is I know, like, with little kids' stuffed animals, like, they make them with the big googly eyes because they're more attracted with, you know, have big eyes.
I think for present, I think that's where you're seeing a lot of robotic developments go. There's no, I mean, they don't make it a human face exactly right. They make it, even for adults, like Italia Health, I mean, they make it so that it's a unique, and they study it and they do studies and they make it so unique. Like some robots don't even have to talk, right? To be, so it depends on the use, and then they design that use so that it will be very acceptable and easy to use. Usually there is some sort of, if they don't talk, there is some sort of, you know, eye response, because that's still how we read, you know. I mean, but although LEQ really doesn't have an eye, but it articulates, you know, as long as we can see some response.
Right.
And of course we adapt. So it's even better, you know, like you said, if they're big googly eyes or no eyes, right? As long as it's designed for what we need to have it do, it's probably even better if it's not necessarily resembling a specific other robot or human or animal sometimes, right? But it really depends on the use. Yeah.
You know, I know that this conversation is about robots, but really the other story that I hear here, I mean, that's really inspiring to me is that you kind of created this, and like really that journey is really what's most intriguing to me, and how you know, got into you went into the field in whatever capacity just to learn and to be in it. And, you know, could you offer some advice to somebody who, you know, really feels like there's something that they want to create and don't know how to get there? And, you know, what would you say to that person?
Wow. Yeah. Well, you know, I would say if you're looking at financial success, I'm probably not the best role model, but yeah, I've had a lot of unique successes. And I mean, here's the thing today, and I'm hoping it gets better in the future. I mean, Asimov predicted this, that now people can see robots doing instead of just work, robots doing their manufacturing, so that we can reap the benefits of productivity, so that all of us humans have our needs met: shelter, food, and healthcare, right? And then this is what Asimov predicted. And then we could have more leisure time to do what we humans do best: create, etc. So today's a very different, meaning that you know, careers are changing. I mean, 80% of the careers aren't even going to be known and for upcoming people who are starting a career. But still, what I come back to is, look, you have to, what's really important is never to let go of a sense of purpose, which I think is going to become more prominent as we go forward, because we don't have to worry about work. I don't think we're going to have to in the future deal with work the way we do now, 50, 80 weeks. And I mean, hours per week. I think it's going to be very different. And I think what's going to drive people is, right, so here we are all isolated, but we have a sense of purpose that gets you, you know, to gets you to work together to do what you guys do for all your websites and for your podcast, right? And so I think a sense of purpose and a passion about that. And what I say is, I mean, there were times I was selling commercial real estate. I was waitressing. Oh, for Wilt Chamberlain, by the way, his first restaurant in Boca. Oh, another dead old man. Okay. And so there was a time that, you know, that I just was doing other things to make money. So, you know, leasing commercial real estate, but I never stopped like, okay, well, I'm going to like watch a robot movie. So you have to, even if you do something else, and of course we all have to make ends meet, and you have to do based on the responsibilities you have, but it should never stop you from, okay, I can do 15 minutes a day to my art project. I love art. Even if it's a hobby, you know, you can try to transfer that hobby eventually over time, and you have to believe that you will, and you'll never stop into something that makes money. But I hope that the future of society will allow us a lot more leisure time to pursue collaboratively with other humans, you know, a career we want. But look, I literally made it up as I go along. And today people like now, I mean, like, I'm not an AI, I'm not an engineer. No, I mean, I've certainly been, you know, experienced a lot. I've been to 100 factories, you know, to see it all and do it all. But I'm not a programmer. I'm not a hardware engineer. I'm not a cognitive, now people like really could get a degree in all the different cognitive sciences and neuronet and deep learning, this is like way above me. So what I did for my lifetime is, I think I pioneered a field that's going to be very different going forward, a real scientific field that combines understanding psychology, human and AI and robot, minds. So there you go. I mean, I don't have any great answer other than, it hasn't been an easy journey, but, it's important to have, I think, a dream and a goal.
Absolutely.
I think that separates humans from anything else.
And having the tenacity to follow up on it and give it the persistence, which is why we love speaking to people like you, Joanne.
Well, honey, I have faced more rejection than you can ever imagine. It's unbelievable. I mean, all the years, I've had so many rejections, and this was like in '94. I remember Slashdot did an interview with me, and all these smart people would say, well, who the hell is she? And I'd say, dude, you come say that to my face, you don't post it. You don't call me the C word online. You come say that to my face, So, I've faced a tremendous, and it's not always easy. I've started a lot of projects that I spent a lot of time on that didn't pan out or panned out very disappointingly. Mm-hmm. So I've had to rebound. And like I said, I make it up as I go. And I don't have patients in my waiting room paying me. So.
Well, Brian, is there anything else you wanted to touch Joanne about?
No, I think it was great. I'm sorry I derailed that like 50 seconds.
That's all right. I'm very happy with where we ended up. But Joanne, can you let everybody know where they can learn more about you and what you do?
Sure. They can go to my website at www.robot.md, and my YouTube channel is Robot MD Shrink. Is that it? Robot MD Shrink.
We'll put the link. We'll put the link in the description as well.
I need a neural upgrade, and my Twitter, which I don't do a lot though, that is at Robot Shrink. But primarily, it's my website and my YouTube that I have, most of my stuff on.
Yeah. So everyone, make sure you follow Joanne on YouTube.
You're so sweet. Make it number 20 and 21, everybody.
Let's do it. Thank you so much for joining us.
Take care. Thank you so much.